Welcome to Life in the Pit, a podcast about the lives and adventures of instrumentalists within the wonderful world of musical theater. And now, here is your host, David Lane.
Hello and welcome back. It is great to be with you once again, and this is an episode that is at least a couple of months overdue. I had this conversation that I recorded with my guest today, John Eldridge, back in March, and I told him it would probably be April before we put this out. And instead, it's almost the end of June. However, if there is one silver lining in all that, is that this is being released on Friday, June 27th, 2025, which marks the 5th anniversary of episode 1 of this podcast. So first and foremost, if you're listening to this, if you have been with us through the very beginning, thank you so much for being a listener. This was my very first podcast, and it's one that I'm happy to leave out even if I'm hardly doing any new episodes at all. But I'm so glad that we were able to talk to all kinds of pit musicians and get a lot of different perspectives, and all of those conversations are there. And I will say a little bit more about the podcast going forward after I've shared this conversation, as well as a few additional thoughts that come up with my conversation with John Eldridge. So John Eldridge, if you're a longtime listener to the podcast, that name is going to sound familiar because back in 2021, we had a 2-part episode series with him about the world of programming for keyboardists. And as I'll explain in our conversation, I felt like this needed a 2025 update based on just some experience that I've had recently, just some observations I've made more about theaters, even on the community theater level. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to be talking today about if you're a music director, if you're a keyboardist, what kind of investments you should be making, what specific type of equipment you should be looking at, and what kind of skills you should be developing in order to be able to play all of the shows, to be able to say yes to any opportunity that comes your way as far as theater. And of course, we'll talk about John's business, which is Stage Sounds, which makes part of your job a lot easier by giving you, I don't even know how many, definitely over 100, maybe a couple of hundred shows by now that you can rent the keyboard programming for as basically a just open and sync to your keyboard and you're ready to go, which, trust me, saves you hours of work. So again, I'll share some more after our conversation, but let's not delay any further. Here is my updated conversation, my 2025 check-in with John Eldridge. John, it's great to have you back on the podcast again. It's been 4 years, so how have you been?
Oh, it's great to be here. I've been good. Thankfully, a lot busier than I was 4 years ago.
I think we all are in one way or another, at least.
We can probably all agree on. But yeah, no, it's definitely been trending in an upward direction, which I think is good for everybody, obviously. Yeah, I mean, Stage Sounds wise, we've been obviously adding a lot of content. I think we're up to almost 250 shows now.
Wow.
So, woo.
Yeah.
A little party
we're going to come back. We're going to talk about Stage Sounds for sure, give some more information before we leave. So just for the benefit of those who maybe are jumping in, haven't heard all of the episodes of this podcast, you were on a 2-part series back in 2021. I think it was kind of early in 2021. Yeah, it must have been because I remember during the second one you were the only place you could get internet was from your garage, and you were like trying not to freeze.
Oh yeah, that night. Oh man. Oh yeah.
So yeah, it's been almost exactly 4 years, and pandemic regulations were still underway, and so we've had a whole get back into theater segment, and so I guess one of the things that I want to go ahead and just say so I actually said goodbye to all of my listeners a little over a year ago. I didn't have anything else that I really wanted to do with this podcast, and a few months ago, maybe time is a little weird. Maybe about a half a year ago, I had an experience that made me think, okay, maybe I'm not quite done yet. And it was this specific episode that I had in mind that I wanted to bring back. Now, I also, had been following our mutual friend Saccio and seeing how he went from, his career started to take off in theater. So I wanted to do a follow-up with him as well. So we went ahead and did that because I wanted to catch him while he was on tour. But I don't do a lot of live theater anymore. I don't do very much of that, maybe 1 or 2 shows a year, and not much in the way of music directing. But I got to go to a place that was about an hour from me, so not in my immediate area, but kind of, maybe a little more than an hour away. And it was a production of Legally Blonde, and they had 3 keyboardists, and all of them were on MainStage, and all of them were using, I think, rented programs. Now, I had nothing to do with it, so I don't know if it was stage sounds. But they were all on MainStage, and I was, by a pretty good margin, the youngest person playing the keyboard. Now, I was there as a sub. I was just subbing for 3 shows out of the 3-week run.
Which keyboard book were you playing?
Keyboard 3.
Oh, for sure. The strings book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Strings.
Yeah. At least I think, it was Keyboard 3, because the person I was carpooling with was Keyboard 2, and someone I hadn't met before was doing Keyboard 1. But, the person that was on Keyboard 2 and the person that I was subbing for on Keyboard 3 are both probably, I would say, at least 15, 20 years older than I am. And I'm going to be careful how I say this. I would say I would have described them as averse to technology.
Uh-huh. All right.
And the person I'm subbing for, I'll go ahead and even
immediately come to mind.
Oh yeah. And the person I'm subbing for, I follow her on Facebook, and she has posted about how she finally got some tutorial on MainStage about a little over a year ago, and now that she uses it pretty much all the time whenever she can. So, and the person that I carpooled with, kind of the similar situation. It's like she's resisted, having to do shows where you can't just get by with just the keyboard that you have, but having to tap into the technology. So that made me just kind of wonder, yeah, you get to. It made me wonder about a lot of things, and I think we're going to kind of touch on them. So what I want to cover, as briefly as we can, before you have to head out, is there really a trend? Is maybe this a very small sample size of basically, especially as more shows in the last several years become licensed for community theater, is it becoming more important to rethink, if you're a keyboardist for theater, how you go about what kind of equipment you get, and what kind of investments you need to make in order to be ready. So what do you see in your area from this, and especially from and I wonder if I'm right on this, your number of customers has probably increased in stage sound. So what do you see from your end?
Definitely. Well, our primary source of business actually comes from schools, believe it or not. High schools, colleges, universities, even a few middle schools here and there. There aren't a lot of them. But, and there's obviously a big percentage of that are doing it for the first time. It has been that way for a few years, actually.
Right.
But at the more local community level, I guess it's getting there. Yeah. We have a group up here in the greater Boston area, for hit musician gigs, and I'm sort of notorious for chiming in on any of those posts asking, hey, if you even mention a keyboard, is there programming? Are you providing it, or do I have to do it myself? So I think raising the awareness of that has actually been really good.
Right.
More and more people are coming to realize that. And I see more and more gig listings that say if they have a show that has significant programming, they'll mention it. They'll say, yeah, the programming will be provided. But the one thing I noticed, because you're mentioning, equipment, is typically the equipment may not be. You'd be expected, you got to show up with your own keyboard, audio interface, pedals, plus theoretically your own computer. That one, may go one way or the other. They might be able to provide one, they might not. But I think, if you're, starting out in the business, definitely starting with those three things: the keyboard, the computer, and an audio interface. And obviously those kind of run the gamut between, cheap and not so cheap, I guess we'll say. But
yeah, and just to be forthcoming, just what you mentioned there. So 2 years ago, I had a Mac Mini, not as convenient as a laptop, but more convenient than the Mac Studio I have with two monitors and a whole bunch of stuff plugged in. Like this one's, once I got this plugged in to this space, I said, this isn't going anywhere. It's going to stay right here.
Exactly. I have a setup like that here too. And sometimes I have a MacBook that I take in and out, but yeah.
So I made a recent decision, that I will, if a show requires MainStage for me to play, then the theater will have to provide a computer, just like, and I exclude myself from a lot of opportunities there, but I'm okay with that, so, we'll come back to, we talked about MainStage. So I want to assume, while telling everybody, definitely go check out, I'll put the previous episodes that you were on as links in the show notes. So definitely go check that out for, a time capsule of 2021, but also maybe in much more detail, because we really covered a lot. We got into, especially that part 2 episode, kind of got into the history of keyboards in musical theater. It was very, very, I think, I really love those 2 episodes. So this is more of a what's the state of today, but
state of the union.
State of the we won't cover the state of the union.
Yeah, let's not. State of the industry. I like that.
Yeah, state of the industry. I think a lot of people like myself, are. I think most of the people who listen to this are not ones who are already on Broadway. So if they're on Broadway, they're all connected. But it's ones that have a passion for theater and probably community theater, and maybe, as you said, schools. Their high school, their college. Or maybe they're parents of students like that. So let's do just a kind of a review. Let's start with MainStage, and also, one of the things about MainStage, it is for Apple. So if you're aware of any alternatives that PC might have, or Windows might have.
I haven't used a PC in so many years. I believe there was something that the Wicked Productions used called BrainSpawn, or by a company named Forte BrainSpawn. And I think that was pre-MainStage. That was like over 20 years ago.
Wow.
So I don't know if that's still a thing or not. I believe there's a more contemporary equivalent. It's called Gig Performer or something like that. Mm-hmm. Again, I haven't used PCs in so long that I haven't touched any of these things.
Right.
So I could be totally wrong about that. But I remember reading it somewhere. Mm-hmm. But yeah, MainStage is Apple only, and still to this day no iOS equivalent of it. I get asked frequently if it's available for iPad, and it isn't yet.
Right.
But see how far off that might be. I don't know.
Right. So let's just to review. So, like, what is MainStage, and why is it so prevalent in use for keyboards?
Well, what I like to compare it to is if you consider like a DAW, a digital audio workstation, like Logic, or its grandson GarageBand that people might be more familiar with if they're Apple users already, because you get it for free. Mm-hmm. That's how a lot of us started out on it. If you consider what a DAW does, aka enables you to connect microphones and such to your computer so that you can record in a studio environment, MainStage is essentially the live performance version of that.
Yeah.
So it enables you to, if you want, connect, hardware, connect MIDI instruments, and create your own MIDI instruments inside the software, which is essentially what we use it for in the musical theater world. You could certainly connect, microphones and things to your audio interface and do lots of fun stuff that way. But we're typically using it for keyboard programming purposes to create, and host our own series of sounds inside the program. And then that enables you in turn to connect to the hardware, aka your keyboard, any other controls like the pedals, pitch bend wheels, mod wheels, they're usually built into the keyboard, and assign all of those things to their functions within the software so that you essentially have the rig contained in a computer, and you can transmit the files from machine to machine and then connect pretty much virtually any type of hardware, and essentially just use those as controllers to control what's happening in the software.
Okay. And I was just kind of thinking, like, what does MainStage offer a keyboardist that maybe, for example, my Chord Chrome that I've had since 2013 might not be able to do. So now if I just take the Chord Chrome, I can go into performance mode. I can do layers. Now it takes a lot longer because it's all push button, and you have to type in anything. You have to kind of like go through the little wheel. It's very 1995 type.
There, that's the main thing is time. Getting the workflow down and being able to just use it as you use a computer with a mouse and a keyboard. Yeah, and you can work incredibly quickly. That way. But I do think it has components. A lot of the stuff that the Chrome has on there is just as good, if not better, than what's available on MainStage. There's synthesizers built in there. There's pretty huge sample libraries in there of lots of stuff. Right. And I have never owned one, but I've played around with a few of my buddies who have, and they're great keyboards. I'm not gonna knock those. But.
And the Chrome is a midline performance keyboard. It's not the top of the line. It's not the Kronos, and it's not like Kurzweil. Some of the other big ones out there. But if you just take the fact that it will take more time than it does on a computer. Let's kind of get to the limitations. First of all, I am limited to the sounds on my computer. So, like, I can't go actually buy some sounds, from the thousands of providers out there that suits what I'm looking for. I can't make use of even Logic's onboard sounds, which most of are better than what's on the Chrome, with very few exceptions. And also, like when I did Into the Woods, I needed some sound effects. I needed the sound of an actual cow milking. There's no milking cow sound in your general MIDI libraries. You have to go find someone who's actually done a wave file, and you can assign that to a key, and then certain bells tolling, and also. I haven't had to do this before, but I think we talked about like Mamma Mia, for example. I think was the show that you're talking about. Like there are some actual vocal parts that are pre-recorded,
and so you got to hold the note down. Yep.
Yeah, and that's a key trigger. Yeah. So, yeah, we have that to contend with. That MainStage makes that all possible, whereas some of your other things don't. Now, besides MainStage, I know that that's primarily what you do for stage sounds, but as a keyboardist, is there any other technology that you use? Like, I know that this next show that I'm going to be teaching, the sound person uses Q-Lab. I don't know if any music directors use that at all.
That was the next one I was actually going to mention. Yeah. Q-Lab.
So I know nothing about Q-Lab, so tell me all about it.
Believe it or not, I've been using Q-Lab for longer than I've been using MainStage.
Okay.
I've been using Q-Lab probably for close to 20 years since I was in high school. I mean, it's always sort of been the industry standard for sound design. And I know it's expanded, I think, into lighting and projection as well. I can't speak to any of those things. Right. I only know the sound, the audio portion of it. But it's incredibly powerful, and it's available for free. And one of the cool things about it, I'm not here to shill for Q-Lab, by the way.
Well, that's fine.
It's a great company, but I'm not. I am in no way affiliated with them. One of the cool things about it is if you want the pro license, and that, again, like most software, offers you the chance to have a lot more, powerful features. If you want the pro license, you can basically rent it from them, which is a really cool idea. So what they do is they charge you $4 a day, and they'll track through your account how many days you rent it for. And once you've reached 100 days, aka $400, the cost of the license, they just give it to you. And you then own the pro license, which is really cool. So I did that over the years and eventually acquired the pro license. But just know that the software itself is totally free, which is cool. And essentially what it is it's a giant, not giant, into the woods.
Right.
It's basically a playback engine. I mean, and there's just so many ways that if you think about that, how you need to be able to deconstruct playing back sound effects and other sounds in a show. It's not as simple as going into iTunes and cycling through a playlist. So, it enables you to do things like one of the things we use it for in our sector, if you will, is for like click tracks.
Yeah.
So you can create stems, aka different tracks, of the same song. You've got your bass, you've got your strings, your piano, whatever, and then separate those into separate tracks along with the click that goes along with it. And then you can send those to different outputs. And Q-Lab gives you a feature in which you can combine those things into groups and, have them play back at the same time in sync so that everything's triggered like that. That's one of the main ways I use it. But obviously for sound designers, it's incredibly powerful as well. You've got lots of features built into it. I could dive deeply into that, but it is a pretty powerful program. And in terms of, let's see, you mentioned.
Sorry. Let me just jump in. So Q-Lab, I know a person on sound I was talking to him about. He actually uses a different program, one that is kind of very, very similar. But I remember one of the things that he told me a couple of years ago that was surprising because I've done some recorded tracks, because this is a theater that does like between 3 different stages. They do more than one show a month, it's like and so they do use live music for a few shows, but they also use a lot of recorded tracks. And so some for the smaller budget ones, the ones that have been out of print, I tend to do some tracks for that. And he went ahead and told me, because I used to try to guess on the vamps. I used to like get a script out and figure out, okay, this measure will probably go 7 times and before they go on.
Right.
And he finally said, just do it twice, every vamp twice, because he can catch it in the Q-Lab equivalent. And I assume Q-Lab does this too. Like you can, like I don't know what the term is, but you can catch the vamp and then you can release it.
Yeah, in Q-Lab, what they do is if you create markers in Logic and then export your tracks, the markers will translate into what are called slices in Q-Lab, and you can you can go in and repeat those slices if you want. You can also just create vamps, which is to say add an infinite loop in those, and then now this is one of the things that you actually need the pro license for. Funny enough. To be able to devamp to get out of those infinite loops is a pro feature.
Right.
So you have to have the pro feature for that. But one way I actually like to do vamps, and this is funny that we're getting so nitty gritty into this, but is, you can create multiple tracks and then just dip out at the vamp and then come right back in when you get out of it. And then you don't have to worry about it at all. But obviously it requires having multiple tracks. But yes, Q-Lab does have a vamp and devamp feature, which can be helpful if you want to do it that way.
Yeah. I am glad also that you talked about click tracks. That is becoming something, like I've now played a couple of shows where you hear the click track going on. I mean, it was funny, that whole League Blonde experience. It was the first time in a community theater setting that I'd had anything quite like it. Like the conductor, I never had to really watch him because we all had headsets which had the click track. It also had the conductor's kind of microphone.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
and I would just hear, okay, we're on measure 51 and 2, 3, 4, 52, 2, 3, 4, 50. And it was just a nonstop narration. And then for cut, he'd go, now stop. All right, here we go. It was almost like
that more too. I just did a production of Mamma Mia myself where it was the same thing. We were all on click tracks. I had to talk back. I think it's a feature. It's developed because of keyboard conductors,
right?
And if you have your hands totally occupied the entire show, you're playing a heavy duty keyboard one book, like say Mamma Mia is. You don't have your hands free to actually wave a stick. So the alternative is, and obviously if everybody's got their headphones on anyway, listening to the click tracks, then just pipe the microphone right in there with it. It seemed like a logical solution, I guess. But yeah, it seems like these are just becoming more and more prevalent. I also just did Mean Girls with my high schoolers this past fall, and that was another show that we had totally on the click. And I guess, Mamma Mia was probably the first time I ever did it. I was in 2018 at North Shore Music Theater, and that was the first time I ever played on a click. It's been much more common since then, I guess.
Yes.
And the way that I first learned to do it, like I said, was with Q-Lab. And what I would do is, like you, go in and, record things in Logic. I would basically just record the piano book and line up the metronome with that, essentially, for every bar or for whatever I could. And then what you can do is isolate those tracks, solo them. You get the click, you get the conductor, if you want to count offs like 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatever.
Yeah.
I'll even record myself saying things like vamp and,
Right.
That gets fun. But then what you do is essentially isolate the tracks and then bounce them from Logic, export each track individually. So you have the stems, and then I would load those into Q-Lab, group them up, and then fire them as you need. And Q-Lab obviously also allows you to route the outputs if you've got an interface that supports that. So if you've got like a 4 output interface, you can obviously send 4 separate lines, which is helpful if you want to have control of them individually.
So MainStage Q-Lab, I think you were about to suggest something.
I was just going to say the other one, and it was because we were talking about the click tracks. And what I did for Mean Girls with my high school last fall was not this. I did not do this process because we didn't have any sweeteners to play along with them. Mm-hmm. And what I'll do is if there are things like in Mamma Mia where you have those vocals that play along with the band, or if there's anything, other things like that, like in Mamma Mia in the on-track, there's those nightmare vocals that have to go and sync with the music, and so I created that. But whenever you've got sweeteners that have to play along with the click, I feel like it's a lot simpler and safer to put them into Logic so that everything lines up and you know where it is, and then trigger them from Q-Lab. Ableton's another popular software, by the way, that can be used to trigger things like that. Yeah. It's very different from Q-Lab, and I admittedly don't have much experience with it, but that's very popular on Broadway and national tours. I see a lot of that. But the other way that I've been doing recently to create click tracks is sort of a much simpler, faster, kind of, I don't want to say low tech, but different tech in a way. Right. And I've been essentially using an app on my phone. And it's called Tempo. It's basically a metronome, but the app has a feature that allows you to create tempo set lists, basically. And so what I can do is go through, the show song by song, and every time there's a significant tempo change, something that I want to have on a click, I create a different, entry in the set list, quote unquote, for that. Now, it's very different from like building them in Logic because you're not actually creating the whole series of things and you don't have quite as much detailed control. You can basically just set, a tempo and a number to go. You can also add count-ins, but it's pretty simple and a lot more faster and efficient, I find. And I can kind of do it as we're in rehearsal and say, oh, okay, we got like this tempo change here, and I have my, phone on me already, and I don't really need to have like the computer to set it up. And then essentially what we do is plug that in. I do need the dongle, the Apple dongle, to create an 1/8-inch input, and we'll just, take an 1/8 to 1/4 and throw it in a DI. And then, you have click track, and I'll just trigger it from my phone, basically. So it can be a little hairy using a touchscreen to trigger those metronomes, because sometimes if you can't land right on the beat, it's not quite as good and sensitive as you have, like, say, hardware control. But
I've used Tempo for years. Actually, they're the first person I ever reached out to try to get an affiliate link for, and unfortunately, I never heard back from them. So if they catch this episode, I'm still interested.
Yeah, no, it's actually it's really, really helpful. I've done it for several shows, and just creating those little tempo set lists, and then it's I can even use it in rehearsal. If I'm playing for a dance rehearsal or something like that, I can draw up the tempo for. I was just doing it for Cabaret early last year, and the other thing about it is when you bake them in Logic, then the tempo is set.
Yeah.
If you want to make any changes to that, it's kind of too late at that point. Other than going back in and changing it and re-exporting all the stems. don't want to get into that. But, with just a click on the app like that, if I think, oh, this dance needs to be like 2 clicks faster, I can do it right then and there and save it, and it's done.
Yeah.
And, there's nothing else to it. So it's a much more efficient way, I find, to do it. Again, it's not nearly as, powerful or as detailed as being able to build them yourself in Logic, but in terms of a quick and dirty solution, which sometimes is all you need.
So
funny enough, I've actually made a few of those available for rent on Stage Sound. So, hey, if you want to get your clicks for tempo.
So let's talk about financial investment here. So, because I imagine if someone's made it to this point in the episode and they haven't done a whole lot with, or maybe, they're thinking about just keyboard only, the keyboard only days, you might say, it might seem a little overwhelming, but let's talk about the expenses that we have so far. So, Logic, if you wanted to go there, or it's just a typical DAW, is going to be, I have to double check, I think it's $200. It's like $199 or something.
Last time I checked, but that certainly could have gone up in recent years.
Yeah, I don't think they've changed it much. I think they're pretty.
MainStage, amazingly, is still only $30.
Yeah, so $30, so up to $230. If you go the pro license, it sounded like $400 up to
for
maximum.
Q-Lab. Yeah, but again, you can pay that over time. Just rent it. What I would do is rent it when I needed it. If I'm doing a show where I needed to use Q-Lab and I needed those pro level features, I would rent it for maybe a month at a time while I built the session, and then while I used it for the show, and then wouldn't have to pay again. So $4 a day, I think, is what it is. That was probably 10 years ago. But
so we're up to $630, and I can tell you, Tempo's a $3 app still.
Yeah, it's
so we'll round up 640. It's a little less than that. So it's about 640.
I think the great thing about MainStage is that you don't really need to consider the cost of the keyboard, because hopefully you probably already own a keyboard and you can use any keyboard.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So the Chrome that I have was a $1,200 or $1,300 keyboard, and again, that's a midline. You can go find keyboards that are $5,000-$6,000 out there. I have right in front of me, it's an M-Audio key station. Now, it's a 49-key keyboard that I paid less than $200 for. So I'm pretty sure that I could get the 88 key for $300 or $400. So your total investment, now, you want to get a computer that's compatible with all that, and you can look into refurbished Mac laptops.
Yeah,
but
I have bought exclusively refurbished Apple products in my life, and they've always been excellent, and they've lasted for many years.
So you can build yourself, and again, you don't have to have all of this right away, but you could build yourself with just a simple keyboard and the technology we mentioned in a refurbished laptop for probably half the cost of your most advanced keyboard out there. You could get the capability to do everything that you need to in a modern show. Now, we talked a little bit about Stage Sounds. I want you to promote it in just a moment, but I got to be a client of yours back in 2022 when we did the Lightning Thief.
Yeah,
and of course that was very helpful. There was some arpeggiator effects and
some funky stuff in that book.
And that was the last time that I music directed a show, that of that type, that really needed that. But that was very helpful. So I want to talk to those who, because you're going to talk about your products. So I opted to use you because I didn't want to spend the dozens of hours it would take to program MainStage myself, and I wanted the tracks, someone reputable who'd already done it for me. But I know a lot of people will say, well, the music director fee is not that good, so how can it be financed? So I just want to go ahead and offer this before we we talk about what your services are. For me, it was very easy because this was for a group that paid me higher than the local average for a music director. So I was able to just say, well, if I deducted the fee for Stage Sounds from my music director fee, I was still making more than I did with most
Gotcha.
others in the area. So like, and I saved myself time and headache, of just having it something I could download and just set up. I just had to set up my computer. One thing I think you might have mentioned before, and this is something that I think I would recommend to most people if they have like their music director fee is kind of the average and they don't want to cut into that.
Yeah.
You don't want to pay out of pocket. So a lot of theaters, I think the way that you explain it is if you just sat down with the executive director or whoever's making the decisions about money, or the board, whoever it is for your local theater. If they're hiring live musicians to begin with, just tell them that the keyboard, for each keyboardist, you're really hiring 2 people. Just kind of like that's what you have to budget for. Now, it might mean that if the keyboard is really important, you might not have as many other non-keyboard musicians for that show if the budget is limited. But if you just kind of think like what you typically pay a musician per service for a community theater show times the number of services, I think in some cases a stage sounds program is going to be maybe even less than what one musician would make for the total run. So if you kind of think about it, approach it like that, I do think it's really important. You're going to, with these more modern shows and, as technology has improved, this was something you said 4 years ago, as technology has improved, so has the expectations and what composers are willing to do. So you really need something like this. But the first time you sit down to try to program something like 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee yourself, I think you're going to want to wish someone like Stage Sounds who had provided you that program. So tell us about like what some of your popular shows are, and and whatever you're willing to share about like what a fee is for renting a program.
Oh yeah, well all that our information is all available on our website. As far as the fees go, typically for a single keyboard book, the rental is $250. That's been our baseline for several years now, probably. I haven't changed that in a long time. And what we do is we offer, incremental. That's a word. Yep. Incremental, isn't that it?
Yes.
Incremental discounts as you order more. So if you order 2 keyboards, it'll be $400. 3 keyboards is $500. 4 is $600. Et cetera, et cetera. I don't think there's any shows yet that have more than 4 keyboards. There's a few. There's Mamma Mia and there's Little Mermaid. I think maybe Sunset Boulevard. Right. That might be it. It's very rare. But we do offer those discounts, and those apply automatically when you place the orders. It's just the way that we've structured it. As far as other things go, I think when we spoke last time, we had been beginning to add some percussion programming. And that's a thing that we've continued to do for a bunch of our catalog. I couldn't tell you the number off the top of my head. I know the total number of shows, and that includes like different versions of shows, is right around 250. Most of those have keyboards. I think probably at least half have percussion. And that's sort of an interesting little niche part of it, because it's not so much like it is in keyboards where it's like all these different crazy sounds. It might just be mallets and different things like that. But what we've found is that some of our clients need that just due to space constraints. Yeah. And, it's become more popular to have electronics in the pit. A lot of people are using the mallet cat or mallet station so that they don't need room for a marimba and a xylophone and a vibraphone and a set of chimes and a Glock. Because, let's face it, how many of us are playing in giant orchestral-sized pits?
Yeah, I do an annual production of The Wizard of Oz, and the percussionist uses that mallet cat setup because we have a 19-piece orchestra fitting in a pit that might hold 20. Maybe we could get another person there.
Space on the percussion, right?
Yeah.
I know, and I do love the sound of a real great acoustic percussion section. We got to do Sunday in the Park a few years ago, and my percussionist was thrilled because we got to go mostly acoustic, and it was a sight to behold. It was pretty crazy. Sure. So in addition to that, let's see, obviously the keyboards, percussion setups. There's a lot of shows now that are coming out that have drum pad programming. That's another big thing that we've started working on. Again, shows like Mean Girls, shows like SpongeBob. There's sound effects triggered from the drums. sometimes obviously like electronic drum sounds like the 808 drum kit or something like that. And then the other thing that we've actually started doing recently is harp programming. That was a year or two ago that I decided to take the leap into that. And again, not so much like keyboards where we're triggering different sounds. It's just harp sounds. But playing the harp is so different from playing the keyboard because they retune the strings. Yeah. And then you can do all these cool glissandos and other effects that they do. And essentially what we do is we go through and we find all the retuning points and create different things like that and use scripts to create the glissandos, and ends up sounding a little bit more realistic than attempting to just play it on a keyboard, because you can't do that on an actual keyboard. Obviously, I have a lot of love in my heart for harpists, and whenever you can have a real one, it is worth every penny, and it sounds great. Yeah, I know they're few and far between, and they can be hard to find. So,
all right. So I'm monitoring the clock as we go here. We're just about out of time. Again, as we proved in the 2 previous episodes, that was supposed to be 1 part and became 2. This is a subject that could go on, and there's a lot to talk about. But I'll say a few thoughts after we discontinue here. Just kind of my own thoughts. On the keyboard. And investing and all that we haven't already covered. Yeah. But where can people find Stage Sounds? Give us your website.
We're online. Our website is stage-sounds. There's a dash in the middle there. Okay. Stage-sounds.com and on Facebook. But yeah, we are available and frequently adding lots more things. We've had, in the last week alone, I think we've had probably requests for half a dozen new shows. So we're busy bees over here, right, and always adding new stuff.
And I'll speak from my own experience, but when you're ready to rent, come with your own, go to the person on the theater that has the license for the show, because you are above board and you do want the license.
Yes, and that's something we ask for from everyone. We just need to see a copy of that to make sure everybody is playing by the rules, so to speak, as we are. And just to your point about budgeting for stuff like this, I do think it's important that this is something that players themselves or music directors shouldn't have to pay for. Yeah, it's something that should go back to the organization, go back to the producers, and say, okay, this is just a line item you have to add to your budget now. And like you say, it isn't much. It's anywhere from $250 to maybe $500. Yeah, and that's the cost of, like you say, at the community theater level, maybe one additional player.
Hopefully less than one.
Right, exactly. Hopefully. Yeah. I do think it's common to ask people to provide some of the equipment. Especially community theaters don't have that stuff. Schools maybe. I've found more and more schools will provide it, but I do think overall just the trend is going in that direction where people are understanding that it's something that has to be budgeted for, and it should be pushed up the ladder and not down. That's the message I think we should send.
All right. That's the chime up. That's the chime. It's time up.
David, hey, it was great to talk to you again.
All right. Thank you so much. We'll chat again soon. As always, it's great to talk to John. I feel like more and more as we get to 2025 and later especially, keyboards are just becoming more and more essential in when there's going to be live music. And one of the things that I don't think that I mentioned in our conversation. This is the problem with releasing an episode 3 months after having a conversation. But the other thing that kind of inspired this, and the reason that I've been doing some episodes this year that I noticed was that some of the people that I was playing in the pit with, we traveled over an hour to get to that show simply because fewer and fewer theaters in our local area are using live music. And when you do get live music, it is very keyboard driven. And that's just because a lot of artistic directors have understood that if you hire a reed player, you hire a brass player, you hire maybe a violinist, and that's going to sound very thin. But if you hire one keyboardist who can cover a full book that's programmed, they actually will save money, and it'll sound a lot more full. And this isn't something that I'm happy about, that being less work for fewer musicians. But it is something that is a reality of the age. Now, if you are a keyboardist, that means that you still have work, but you do want to invest in what you need. So again, something like MainStage, something like Q-Lab, something like the Tempo app for metronome, and get really comfortable using that technology. That is something you definitely want to do, whether or not you provide it yourself or not. You want to get comfortable using it, because without that, you're going to be saying yes to fewer shows. Okay, happy 5th anniversary to this podcast. Let me say just a few things going forward. So I am not going to do anything with absolutes like this is the last episode, like I pretty much did about a year and a half ago. And that ended up being a full year of absence. So I'm not going to say that this is the last episode. I'm also not going to say that it's not. I will say this. It was my intent to bring this podcast back a little bit more regularly. Was hoping to have, like at least 6, maybe 10 episodes this year. But my other podcast, which is known as Musicianship Mastery, what I found was in order to do Life in the Pit, 6 to 10 episodes a year, I would have to be doing something barely more than that with Musicianship Mastery. I would have to be thinking about every other week with that. In fact, it's just very hard to grow any kind of content creation with less than a consistent schedule. Musicianship Mastery is connected to my business because I am a music teacher and I talk about things that I teach. So it's important that podcast remain a weekly podcast. Life in the Pit is my hobby, and it's a hobby that I've enjoyed greatly. But to be honest, 5 years ago, we were just kind of a few months into a pandemic, and that was 1 year after I had been involved in 11 shows, 9 as music director. So I was fully active and fully passionate about musical theater. Now I pretty much do 1 show a year, and it has to meet kind of a checklist of minimum requirements before I will do that, because this is just not my passion anymore. And I've gone over reasons for that in past episodes, and I won't get into that once again here. But what does that mean for this podcast going forward? Well, it's hard to say. The one thing I could say for sure is that I will not be releasing episodes on a regular or even a semi-regular basis. But if there is a guest who reaches out who I think would fit this podcast to a T, that has an interesting story to tell, I'll be happy to have a conversation and to add their story to all of the other great episodes in this podcast library. So I don't want to say that it's closed, but I can also say that I don't have any plans for the next episode. So there's a chance that this could be the last one. But again, reach out to me if you have someone that you would like for me to record, and I'll do my best to get to them and have a conversation with them. If you have enjoyed what I've talked about here, but not necessarily wanting to hear it specifically for musical theater, I would recommend checking out Musicianship Mastery. There are about 119 episodes right now. A lot of those episodes are solo episodes, but they're about 1/3 of them and feature guests over a variety of industries, and we talk about a lot of great things, so you can catch me there. As far as this podcast goes, again, it's hard to say. I hope that you will enjoy all of the past episodes that we've done, and again, that you'll reach out if you have any suggestions for future episodes. We'll just leave it at that. So this is where I want to remind you that you can follow this podcast however irregularly we post on Instagram at Life in the Pit Pod. And it's important to me that I always acknowledge the voiceover work at the beginning by Bill Cisna and the wonderful thumbnail design by Mark Parolo. You can find all past episodes of this podcast at lifeinthepitpod.com. Feel free to send me a message at davidlanemusic.com. And as always, thank you so much for listening.